I'm barely home before 10 most nights, and Jonathan travels 4 days a week. I felt a heaviness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with my injuries. I don't want to impose, I said softly. It's not an imposition, Mom, Alexandra insisted, though her expression suggested otherwise. Family helps family. But we need to be practical about the logistics. After further discussion, it was decided that I would rotate between my children's homes during my recovery. 2 weeks with Alexandra, then 2 with Michael, then 2 with Rebecca once she returned from her conference. They would share the responsibility of driving me to physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. We'll make it work, Alexandra declared, gathering her designer handbag and car keys. That's what family does. As they left my hospital room, I heard Michael mutter to Alexandra in the hallway. This is going to be a scheduling nightmare. Lisa already complains we never have time together with my work hours. At least it's temporary, Alexandra replied. But we really need to talk to her about long-term planning after this. She can't expect us to drop everything every time there's a crisis. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep as tears slid silently down my cheeks. In that moment, I felt more alone than I had since the day we buried Gerald. The next 6 weeks were among the most humiliating of my life. At Alexandra's house, I was installed in the guest room at the far end of their sprawling colonial home. The room was immaculate but impersonal, like an upscale hotel suite. Alexandra arranged for her housekeeper to check on me twice daily, bringing meals and helping with basic needs, but Alexandra herself was rarely present. Her husband Jonathan would nod politely when passing me in the hallway, but conversations never extended beyond perfunctory inquiries about my comfort. My grandchildren, Alexandra's teenagers, Sophia and Mason, were perpetually busy with extracurricular activities and social engagements. Occasionally, Mason would pop his head into my room to say hello before rushing off to soccer practice or study sessions. Sophia would sometimes sit with me for a few minutes, usually while scrolling through her phone, half listening as I asked about school. The most painful moment came during a dinner party Alexandra hosted for her colleagues. I could hear the laughter and conversation from my room, having not been invited to join. When I ventured out to get a glass of water, Alexandra intercepted me in the hallway. "Do you need something, Mom?" she asked, her smile tight. "I can have Maria bring it to your room." I understood the unspoken message. My presence, with my arm in a sling and my slow, careful movements, would disrupt the sophisticated atmosphere she had cultivated. At Michael's home, the situation was different but equally uncomfortable. His house was chaotic, with 3 active children under 12 and a wife, Lisa, who made little effort to hide her frustration at having another person to care for. Lisa was not unkind, but her exasperation manifested in small ways: heavy sighs when I needed help reaching something, pointed comments about their busy schedule, whispered arguments with Michael when they thought I couldn't hear. "I'm already stretched thin with the kids and my part-time job," Lisa hissed one evening. "I didn't sign up to be a nurse, too." "What am I supposed to do?" Michael responded. "She's my mother. You could spend less time at the office and help." "More," Lisa suggested, "or hire someone to help during the day." "With what money?" Michael shot back. "The business is just recovering from last year's downturn. We can barely cover the mortgage as it is." I pretended to be asleep on the living room sofa, my heart breaking anew. These were the same children who had never hesitated to ask for our help, financial and otherwise, throughout their lives. Gerald and I had given freely, joyfully, without keeping score. Now, it seemed my temporary need had become an unwelcome burden, a disruption to their carefully structured lives. By the time I reached Rebecca's home, I had resolved to accelerate my recovery by any means necessary. I pushed through pain during physical therapy sessions, practiced exercises religiously, and began researching private home health services I could afford once I returned to my apartment. Rebecca's household was marginally more welcoming. Her twins, now 12, were genuinely happy to have me stay, eager to show me their activities and school projects. Rebecca herself was the most attentive of my children, though I could see the strain in her eyes as she balanced her demanding sales job, household management, and now my care. It was during my final week at Rebecca's house that the conversation occurred, the one that would ultimately change the course of all our lives. Rebecca, her husband Daniel, Alexandra, and Michael had gathered in Rebecca's kitchen while I rested, in the guest room. They thought I was sleeping, but I had awakened and was making my way slowly down the hallway when I heard my name mentioned. "Mom's recovery is taking longer than expected," Alexandra was saying. "We need to consider more permanent arrangements." "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca asked. "A nursing home? She would hate that." "Not necessarily a nursing home," Alexandra replied, "but some kind of assisted living arrangement, somewhere with staff who are trained for this kind of care." "Those places are expensive," Michael pointed out. "Her pension and Social Security wouldn't cover it." She must have some savings," Alexandra insisted. "Dad was always careful with money." "Whatever she has won't last long in those facilities," Daniel, Rebecca's husband, interjected. "They start at what, $5,000 a month?" "Well, we can't continue like this indefinitely," Alexandra said firmly. "We all have careers, children, responsibilities. Mom needs to understand that." "So what are you saying?" Rebecca asked, her voice tight. "That we just abandon her?" "Of course not," Alexandra replied sharply. "But we need to be realistic. Each of us continuing to disrupt our lives and families on a rotating basis isn't sustainable. Mom is becoming a financial drain on all of us. Time we could be working, childcare expenses when we need to cover her appointments, not to mention the emotional toll." "A financial drain?" Rebecca repeated. "After everything Mom and Dad did for us?" Alexandra sighed. "That was different. They were our parents. It was their responsibility to raise us. And now she's our responsibility," Rebecca countered. "To an extent," Alexandra agreed. "But there are limits, practical considerations. We each have our own families to support now." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall for support. A financial drain. The words echoed in my mind, cutting deeper than any physical pain I'd experienced. I thought about the vacation cabin we'd sold for Alexandra's tuition, the retirement savings we'd given Michael, the second mortgage for Rebecca's twins' medical care. I thought about the trust fund silently growing, waiting to benefit the next generation. Children who were being taught that caring for their grandmother was an unreasonable burden, a drain on resources better allocated elsewhere. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The day my daughter Alexandra told me I was financially draining the family, I felt something inside me shatter like fine crystal hitting marble. For 42 years, I had poured every ounce of my being into my children, sacrificed career advancements, personal dreams, and even my health. I had quietly built a life insurance trust fund worth $12. $4 million that they knew nothing about. It was meant to be my final gift to them, ensuring their children would never struggle as I once did. But in that single moment, as my own flesh and blood calculated my worth against their mortgage payments, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. The trust fund my late husband and I had spent decades building would never reach their hands. Sometimes the most powerful lesson about appreciation comes when something precious slips through your fingers, especially when you never knew you were holding it in the first place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Olivia Richardson. I'm 73 years old now, though when this story began, I had just celebrated my 68th birthday. alone in my apartment with a store-bought cupcake and a small candle that flickered in the empty room. My husband Gerald had passed away 3 years earlier after a brave battle with pancreatic cancer. We'd been married for 45 years, building our lives from nothing into something substantial. Not wealthy by society's standards, but comfortable. Enough to help our children whenever they needed it. We had 3 children: Alexandra, my eldest at 47, who followed in her father's footsteps and became a corporate attorney; Michael, 44, who built a moderately successful construction company; and Rebecca, our youngest at 40, who worked in pharmaceutical sales. All 3 were married with children of their own, living in spacious homes with manicured lawns, in neighborhoods I could never have dreamed of growing up. Those neighborhoods existed partly because of the sacrifices Gerald and I made. When Alexandra was accepted to an Ivy League university, we sold our vacation cabin, the only luxury we'd ever allowed ourselves, to cover her first year's tuition. When Michael's first business venture failed, we withdrew $80,000 from our retirement fund to help him start again. When Rebecca's twin girls were born with respiratory issues requiring specialized care, we took out a second mortgage on our home to help cover the medical bills not covered by insurance. Gerald and I never complained. We believed that's what parents do. They give everything to ensure their children have better opportunities than they did. And in many ways, we succeeded. Our children wore designer clothes, drove luxury cars, and sent their children to prestigious private schools. They had the life we had only read about in magazines. What they didn't know was that Gerald had been extraordinarily careful with his investments over the years. While working as a mid-level corporate attorney, he had cultivated relationships with financial advisors who guided him toward modest but consistently performing investments. Small gains over time, he would remind me, are how ordinary people build extraordinary legacies. By the time Gerald was diagnosed with cancer, we had quietly accumulated nearly $2 million in various investments, properties, and insurance policies. During his final year, Gerald worked with our estate attorney to establish a generation-skipping trust fund that would eventually grow to $4 million. The trust was designed to bypass our children and go directly to our grandchildren when they turned 25, ensuring they would have resources for education, housing, or whatever dreams they might pursue. "Our children have already had our help," Gerald had whispered to me from his hospital bed. "They're established now. But our grandchildren, they'll face a world we can't even imagine. This will be our way of still taking care of them when we're long gone." We decided not to tell our children about the trust. Gerald worried that knowing about such a substantial inheritance might create expectations or, worse, dependency. "Let them continue building their own lives," he said. "This will be our silent gift, our final act of love." After Gerald passed, I moved from our family home into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. The house had too many memories, too many empty spaces where Gerald's laughter should have been. Besides, maintaining a 4-bedroom house alone was beyond. My physical capabilities as arthritis gradually claimed more of my joints. The children helped with the move, of course. They selected which furniture should come with me, the smallest pieces, which should go to storage, items they might want someday, and which should be sold or donated, anything too worn or outdated. Throughout the process, I noticed how they appraised each item not for sentimental value, but for potential worth or usefulness in their own homes. "Mom, you really should consider a retirement community," Alexandra suggested as we unpacked dishes in my new kitchen. "They have activities, medical staff on call, and you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance." "I'm not ready for that," I replied, carefully placing Gerald's favorite coffee mug on the shelf. "I still want my independence." Alexandra sighed. That familiar sound of exasperation I'd grown accustomed to hearing. "Well, at least promise you'll think about it. Your retirement savings won't last forever, especially if you need specialized care later." I nodded but said nothing. Alexandra didn't know about the additional income from Gerald's investments that supplemented my teacher's pension. I lived modestly by choice, not necessity. The apartment was in a safe neighborhood near a lovely park where I walked every morning. The kitchen was small but efficient, perfect for preparing meals for one or the occasional dinner when my grandchildren visited. For the first 2 years after Gerald's passing, I maintained a comfortable routine. I volunteered at the local library 3 days a week, joined a water aerobics class for seniors, and had lunch with former colleagues every other Thursday. My children called occasionally, usually when they needed something, advice about a family, recipe for a dinner party, recommendations for a reliable plumber, or most commonly, babysitting services for their children. I never refused to help. My grandchildren were the light of my life, and spending time with them filled the emptiness Gerald left behind. I attended their soccer games and dance recitals, helped with science projects, and listened to their secrets about crushes and playground politics. In those moments, I felt truly alive and necessary. Then came the fall that changed everything. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October. The sidewalk outside my apartment building was slick with rain-soaked leaves, and as I stepped out for my morning walk, my foot slipped. I landed hard on my left hip, the pain immediate and blinding. A neighbor found me and called an ambulance. The diagnosis was both better and worse than expected. No hip fracture, thankfully, but severe damage to my rotator cuff from trying to break my fall. I would need surgery followed by months of physical therapy. The doctor explained I would temporarily need assistance with daily activities. Cooking, cleaning, even dressing myself would be challenging during recovery. From my hospital bed, I called Alexandra. She arrived 2 hours later, her face a mask of professional concern as she consulted with doctors and reviewed my discharge instructions. Michael arrived that evening after finishing work, bringing a small bouquet of carnations from the hospital gift shop. Rebecca called from her sales conference in Phoenix, promising to help once she returned in a week. "We need to figure out a care plan," Alexandra announced as we sat in my hospital room the day before discharge. "You can't possibly manage alone in your apartment." "I could hire a home health aide," I suggested, "just temporarily." Alexandra's eyebrows rose. "Those services are expensive, Mom. Does your insurance cover that?" "I have some savings," I said quietly. Michael looked up from his phone. "Those services are like $25 an hour. That's over $4,000 a month for full-time help." "What about a rehabilitation facility?" Alexandra suggested. "Insurance would cover that, at least partially." I shook my head. "I want to be in my own home." Alexandra and Michael exchanged glances, a silent communication that excluded me, as though I wasn't capable of participating in decisions about my own life. "Well," Alexandra said finally, "I suppose you could stay with one of us for a while." Neither of them immediately volunteered their homes. Michael cleared his throat. "Our guest room is being renovated right now. The contractor says it'll be at least another month." Alexandra nodded. "And we're in the middle of a major case at the firm." A lifetime of selfless giving suddenly seemed foolish rather than noble. The quiet pride I'd taken in my children's success turned to ash as I realized they measured even my worth in dollars and cents. I returned to my room without making my presence known, my mind racing with a clarity I hadn't felt since Gerald's death. By morning, I had made my decision. The trust fund would never reach my children or their children. I would find a better purpose for Gerald's legacy and for the remaining years of my life. As I lay in bed that night, I whispered to Gerald's memory, "I think we made a mistake, my love. We gave them everything except the understanding of what it truly means to give." The morning after overhearing my children's conversation, I woke with a resolve that felt almost foreign to me. For decades, I had operated from a place of maternal accommodation, bending, adjusting, and yielding to ensure everyone else's comfort. Now, I felt something different stirring within me. Self-preservation, I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a light blue blouse Gerald had always loved rather than the practical loungewear I'd been existing in during my recovery. I applied a touch of lipstick, styled my silver hair, and even fastened my mother's pearl earrings, small acts of dignity that reminded me I was still Olivia Richardson, not merely a problem to be managed. When I emerged from the guest room, Alexandra was at Rebecca's kitchen island, tapping furiously on her laptop while nursing a cup of coffee. She glanced up, momentarily surprised by my appearance. "You're looking better," she observed. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well," I replied, my voice steady. "I've made a decision. I'll be returning to my apartment tomorrow." Alexandra's fingers halted mid-keystroke. "Tomorrow? That's way too soon. Your physical therapist said you need at least 2 more weeks of assistance." "I've already called a home health service," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "They can provide the support I need." "Mom, those services are ridiculously expensive," Alexandra protested. "We talked about this." I smiled thinly. "You talked, I listened, and now I've decided." Something in my tone must have alerted her that this wasn't the usual mother-daughter dynamic. She studied my face for a moment, then closed her laptop. "Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. "I heard your conversation last night," I said simply. "About me being a financial drain." Alexandra's expression flickered between embarrassment and defensiveness. "You misunderstood. We were just discussing practical realities." "I understood perfectly," I replied, "and it helped clarify some things for me." Rebecca entered the kitchen, still in her robe, her face brightening when she saw me. "Mom, you're up and dressed. You look lovely." "Thank you, dear. I was just telling Alexandra that I'll be returning to my apartment tomorrow. I've arranged for home care services." Rebecca exchanged a quick glance with Alexandra. "Are you sure that's wise? We don't mind you staying longer." "Some of us have concerns about the expense," I said mildly, watching Alexandra's cheeks flush. "And I value my independence." An uncomfortable silence settled over the kitchen. Rebecca busied herself making toast, while Alexandra reopened her laptop, though I noticed she wasn't actually typing. "I'd like to speak with all of you this evening," I continued. "You, Michael, and your spouses. There are some financial matters we should discuss." Alexandra's head snapped up, sudden interest lighting her eyes. "Financial matters? What kind of financial matters?" "My long-term care plans," I said, "among other things." "Of course," Rebecca said quickly. "I'll call Michael. We can have dinner here tonight, all of us." "Perfect," I replied, taking my coffee to the patio where the morning sun was warming the air. For the rest of the day, I observed a subtle shift in the household energy. Rebecca made my favorite lunch, chicken salad with grapes and walnuts, and inquired several times if I needed anything. Alexandra made 3 phone calls in the garden, speaking in hushed tones that carried fragments of financial matters, and "we don't know anything for certain," to where I sat reading. By evening, all 3 of my children and their spouses had gathered at Rebecca's dining table. Michael arrived first, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before asking if I was feeling all right, his concern seemingly genuine now that financial matters were to be discussed. Alexandra and Jonathan arrived together, both still in business attire, apologizing for being slightly late due to traffic. Daniel, Rebecca's husband, opened a bottle of wine and distributed glasses to everyone except me, knowing that my medication restricted alcohol consumption. Rebecca had prepared a lovely meal of roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, and spring vegetables, but despite the delicious aromas, tension hung over the table like a fog. Conversation remained superficial throughout the meal. Comments about the children's activities, the unseasonably warm weather, an upcoming charity event Alexandra and Jonathan would be attending. Finally, as Rebecca served coffee and a store-bought cheesecake, Alexandra cleared her throat and addressed me directly. So, Mom, you mentioned wanting to discuss some financial matters? All eyes turned to me, and I felt a momentary wave of sadness. When had my children started viewing me primarily through the lens of potential inheritance? When had I become a balance sheet to them rather than a mother? Yes, I said, setting down my coffee cup. I've been thinking about my living arrangements and long-term care plans. We're all concerned about that too, Michael interjected, his tone softening into what I recognized as his client voice, the one he used when pitching to potential customers. I'm sure you are, I replied, particularly about the financial implications. A slight flush crept up Michael's neck. We're concerned about your well-being, Mom. The financial aspect is just one part of that. Of course, I agreed. Well, I want to set your minds at ease. I won't be asking any of you to contribute to my care costs. I have resources you may not be aware of. Alexandra leaned forward slightly. What kind of resources? I smiled, remembering Gerald's cautious approach to discussing our finances. Gerald made some sound investments over the years. I have sufficient funds to cover home health care for the foreseeable future. Dad left additional investments? Michael asked, surprise evident in his voice. Exclude family members? I'm saying I've reconsidered what legacy truly means, I replied, and I'm exercising my right to direct my assets according to my values. Mom, you're being cryptic, Alexandra said, frustration edging her voice. If you're making major changes to your estate plans, we deserve to know the details. Why? I asked simply. Why do you deserve to know the details of how I choose to distribute my personal assets? Because we're your children, Michael stated, as if this were self-evident. Yes, you are, I agreed, and I love you deeply. But being my children doesn't entitle you to my resources, nor does it give you the right to information about my financial decisions. We're not saying we're entitled to anything, Rebecca protested. But family communication is important. I agree, I said. Which is why I'm communicating now that my estate plans have changed in response to recent events and revelations. The specific details will become clear in due time. Alexandra's legal training took over. Mom, if someone is influencing your decisions, this new attorney or investment advisor, we need to be concerned. Elder financial abuse is unfortunately common. I laughed softly, genuinely amused by her assumption that any decision contradicting their interests must be the result of manipulation. I'm not being manipulated, Alexandra. I'm finally seeing clearly. For decades, I believed that parental love meant giving everything without expectation of return. I now realize that was a disservice, to you and to myself. It created an unhealthy dynamic where my needs became inconvenient interruptions to the comfortable lives my sacrifices helped build. That's not true, Rebecca insisted, tears now flowing freely. We care about you. I believe you do, I said gently. But caring and prioritizing are different things. When my temporary dependence became clear, I became a problem to solve rather than a person to cherish. Daniel, who had remained largely silent, suddenly spoke up. Olivia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. No one thinks of you as a burden. Thank you, Daniel. But I heard the conversation quite clearly, I replied. What's important now is that we all understand where things stand. I'll be returning to my apartment tomorrow. I've arranged for professional home care. I'll be selling the Vermont property, and I've restructured my estate plans in accordance with my current values and priorities. A heavy silence fell over the table. Each of my children appeared to be processing this information differently. Alexandra with analytical suspicion, Michael with evident disappointment, and Rebecca with emotional distress. Is there anything else you want to tell us? Alexandra finally asked. Yes, I said, softening my tone. Despite everything, I love you all very much. That hasn't changed and never will. What's changing is how I express that love, and how I expect to be treated in return. The remainder of the evening was strained. Jonathan and Daniel made awkward attempts at reviving conversation, while my children moved through emotions ranging from contrition to confusion to calculation. I observed it all with a strange sense of detachment, as though watching a play, whose ending I already knew. When it came time for me to retire to the guest room, all three of my children hugged me with unusual intensity. Rebecca clung a bit longer, whispering, "I'm sorry if we hurt you, Mom. We never meant to." "I know, sweetheart," I replied, patting her back. "But sometimes the wounds we inflict unintentionally cut the deepest." In the privacy of the guest room, I called Marianne Thornfield, my estate attorney. Though it was after business hours, she had given me her cell number for urgent matters. "Everything is prepared as we discussed," she confirmed after greeting me. "The trust amendment documents are ready for your signature tomorrow at 2 p.m. The charitable foundation paperwork is also complete. Once you sign, the changes will be legally binding." "Thank you, Marianne," I said. "I'll be there." "Are you still comfortable with the extent of these changes?" she asked. "They represent a significant departure from your previous estate plan." "I'm certain," I replied without hesitation. "Recent events have only confirmed that this is the right decision." After ending the call, I sat at the small desk in the guest room and wrote 3 identical letters, one for each of my children. The letters were brief but heartfelt, explaining that my revised estate plan reflected my values rather than any lack of love for them. I wrote that true wealth isn't found in money or possessions, but in how we treat one another, especially when doing so requires sacrifice. I reminded them of the joy Gerald and I had found in helping others, and how that joy had always outweighed any material comforts we might have secured for ourselves instead. I concluded each letter with a hope for the future. "I believe you have the capacity to understand what I'm doing and why, perhaps not immediately, but someday. My deepest wish is that this decision might lead you back to the values your father," and I tried to instill compassion, generosity, and the understanding that family means supporting each other, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's not. I sealed the envelopes and placed them in my purse. These letters wouldn't be delivered until after my death, attached to the estate documents that would reveal the full extent of what Gerald and I had built, and my decision to redirect that legacy. The next morning, Michael arrived at Rebecca's house in his large SUV to drive me back to my apartment. He had insisted on being the one to transport me, perhaps seeing an opportunity for a private conversation. The drive began in awkward silence, broken only by his occasional comments about traffic or the changing neighborhood landscapes we passed. Finally, about halfway to my apartment, he spoke directly about the previous night's discussion. "Mom, I hope you know we all want what's best for you. If we've seemed distracted or unsupportive during your recovery, it's only because we're juggling so many responsibilities." "I understand that, Michael," I replied. "Life is complicated. For everyone." "Exactly," he said, seemingly relieved by my response. "And about the Vermont property. I hope you'll at least consider letting me look at development options before finalizing the sale. It could be a win-win situation." "The sale is proceeding," I said firmly. "I've made my decision." His knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. "Don't you think these kinds of decisions should involve family discussion? That land has emotional significance for all of us." "Does it?" I asked. "When was the last time you visited the property?" "Michael?" He frowned. "That's not the point. It's the potential, the future possibility it represents." "Exactly," I said. "It represents potential and possibility, for me in the present, not for some hypothetical family gathering that's been someday for 30 years. Michael sighed heavily. "I feel like something's changed. You're different since the fall." "Not different," I corrected. "Just more clear-sighted. Sometimes it takes a shock to the system to bring things into focus." And what exactly have you brought into focus? He asked, an edge creeping into his voice. The distinction between what I hoped our family relationship was and what it actually is, I replied calmly. It's been educational. Michael pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, turning to face me once the engine was off. His expression had shifted from frustration to something more calculating. Mom, I need to ask you something directly, he said. How significant are these financial resources you mentioned? Are we talking about retirement savings or something more substantial? I studied my son's face, so like Gerald's in structure but lacking the genuine warmth that had always animated my husband's expressions. In that moment, I saw clearly how Gerald's and my approach to parenting had failed in crucial ways. We had given abundantly, but had never required emotional reciprocity. We had modeled sacrifice without teaching the deeper value behind it. Michael, I said gently, the fact that this is your primary concern tells me everything I need to know about the wisdom of my decision. His face flushed. That's not fair. I'm trying to understand the full picture. The full picture is this, I said, my voice steady. I have sufficient resources for my needs. I am restructuring my estate in ways that align with my values, and I am finally prioritizing my own well-being after decades of putting everyone else first. I reached for the door handle, signaling the end of our conversation. Now, would you please help me with my suitcase? I have an appointment this afternoon I need to prepare for. Michael helped me settle into my apartment with uncharacteristic attentiveness, arranging my medications on the kitchen counter, making sure the path to the bathroom was clear of obstacles, even offering to stock my refrigerator with groceries. And I politely declined, noting that I had arranged for delivery service. As he prepared to leave, he embraced me awkwardly. We all love you, Mom. I hope you know that. I do, I assured him. And I love you all deeply. That will never change. After he left, I stood in the center of my modest apartment, feeling a profound sense of relief at being back in my own space. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe freely, move at my own pace, make decisions without explanation or justification. I spent the next hour preparing for my appointment with Marianne Thornfield, gathering the documents I needed and reviewing the amendments to the trust one final time. The changes were significant, life-altering for all involved, but I felt absolutely certain of my decision. At precisely 1:30 p.m., a car service arrived to take me to Marianne's office. As we drove through the city, I gazed out at the spring, flowers beginning to bloom in parks and median strips. There was something poetic about this season of renewal coinciding with my own transformation. I thought about the trust fund that Gerald and I had so carefully built over decades, the one our children never knew existed. By tomorrow, it would be irrevocably redirected. The $4 million that was meant to secure our grandchildren's futures would instead serve a different purpose entirely. For the first time since overhearing my children's conversation about me being a financial drain, I felt a sense of peace. Gerald had always said that money was just a tool, neither inherently good nor bad, but powerful in how it's used. Now, I would use that tool to shape a legacy that truly reflected our values, not just our DNA. As the car approached the sleek downtown building housing Marianne's law firm, I silently thanked Gerald for his financial wisdom and foresight. You always said we should prepare for unexpected storms, I whispered to his memory. You couldn't have known this particular storm would come, but you gave me the shelter I needed to weather it. I stepped out of the car with renewed purpose, ready to rewrite the future in ways my children couldn't yet imagine. The awakening that had begun with pain was leading to something I hadn't anticipated: freedom. Marianne Thornfield's office embodied quiet elegance. Tasteful artwork adorned the walls, bookshelves lined with leather-bound legal volumes, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. As her assistant ushered me into the spacious conference room, I noticed fresh flowers on the polished mahogany table and a carafe of water with lemon slices floating on top. "Mrs. Richardson," Marianne greeted me warmly, rising from her chair. She was a striking woman, in her late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a chignon and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "I'm glad you're feeling well enough to come in person. Are you comfortable? Can I get you anything?" "I'm quite comfortable, thank you," I replied, settling into the ergonomic chair she indicated. "And I appreciate you arranging everything on such short notice." Marianne nodded, her expression professional but compassionate. "When clients are as certain as you are about their wishes, I make it a priority to execute them promptly." She placed a leather portfolio on the table between us. "I have all the documents prepared as we discussed. The amendments to the generation skipping trust, the establishment of the Richardson Larson Charitable Foundation, and the updated will reflecting these changes." "Excellent," I said, feeling a surprising calm despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. "Before we proceed with signatures," Marianne said, leaning forward slightly, "I want to confirm once more that you understand the implications of these changes. The redirection of the trust assets from your biological descendants to the charitable foundation is irrevocable. Once executed, these funds cannot be returned to your family line." "I understand completely," I assured her, "and you've considered the potential relational impact this may have when your children eventually discover these decisions." I smiled sadly. "That's precisely why I'm doing this, Marianne. The relational damage has already occurred. This is my response, not out of vengeance, but out of a desire to restore proper perspective." She nodded, apparently satisfied with my clarity of purpose. "In that case, let's proceed." For the next hour, I signed document after document, each signature solidifying my new path forward. With each flourish of the pen, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: grief for what my family relationships had become, determination to create meaning from that disappointment, and an unexpected sense of liberation. By the time I signed my final page establishing the Richardson Larson Charitable Foundation as the primary beneficiary of the $12.4 million trust fund, I felt as though I had shed a heavy cloak I'd been carrying for years. The foundation would focus on supporting elderly individuals without family resources, providing dignity, care, and community for those who might otherwise face their final years alone and vulnerable. "Congratulations, Olivia," Marianne said, as her notary applied the final seal. "The Richardson Larson Foundation is now officially established. The board members you selected have all confirmed their willingness to serve. They'll convene their first meeting next month to begin establishing protocols for selecting grant recipients." I smiled at the mention of Gerald's middle name paired with mine in perpetuity. "Thank you, Marianne. Gerald would have approved." "Of this, I'm certain." "The final matter," Marianne said, sliding a slim envelope across the table, "is this letter to be included with your will, to be opened only after your passing. You mentioned wanting to explain your decisions to your children." "Yes," I said, taking the sealed letters I had written the night before from my purse and placing them alongside the envelope. "These are for each of my children individually. Please make sure they're delivered along with the estate documents when the time comes." Marianne accepted them with a solemn nod. "Of course. Now, how would you like to proceed with the Vermont property sale? My real estate contact is ready to move forward whenever you give the word." "Immediately," I replied without hesitation. "I'd like to use a portion of those funds for my next endeavor." "Which is?" she inquired, her curiosity evident. "Creating a home that truly reflects who I am now," I said, "not who I was expected to be." 2 days later, a for sale sign appeared on the Vermont property, and by the end of the week, we had received 3 offers, all above asking price. The final sale closed at $892,000, even higher than the initial estimate. The transaction was completed with remarkable efficiency, the proceeds transferred directly to my newly established personal account at Meridian Trust Bank. Over the following weeks, I adjusted to life back in my apartment with the assistance of Elaine, a compassionate home health aide who came 4 hours each day to help with physical therapy exercises, meal preparation, and household tasks I couldn't yet manage with my injured shoulder. Contrary to my children's dire predictions about the financial burden, the cost was entirely manageable given my actual resources. I noticed a distinct change in my children's behavior after our dinner conversation. They called more frequently, offered help more readily, and seemed keenly interested in my financial decisions. Alexandra suggested lunch meetings to discuss estate planning options. Michael repeatedly mentioned construction companies that specialized in aging-in-place renovations for the Vermont property, despite my informing him it had already been sold, and Rebecca invited me to Sunday dinners with increasing regularity. Their sudden attentiveness might have warmed my heart months ago, but now I recognized it for what it was: concern about potential inheritance rather than genuine care for my well-being. Still, I maintained cordial relationships with all of them, neither encouraging their mercenary interest nor openly acknowledging it. 6 weeks after my fall, my shoulder had healed sufficiently for most daily activities, though certain movements still caused discomfort. Elaine's visits reduced to 3 days per week, primarily to assist with physical therapy exercises and occasional errands. I had begun taking brief walks in the neighborhood park again, gradually rebuilding my strength and stamina. It was during one of these walks that I encountered Eleanor Whitford, a woman I'd known casually from my volunteer work at the library. Eleanor was a widow in her 70s, elegantly composed with the kind of serene confidence that comes from having weathered life's storms with grace. "Olivia!" she called, waving from a park bench. "I heard about your fall. How wonderful to see you up and about again." I joined her on the bench, grateful for the chance to rest before completing my circuit of the park. "Thank you, Eleanor. It's been a challenging recovery, but I'm making progress." "You look well," she observed. "There's something different about you, a certain lightness, despite the physical setback." I smiled, struck by her perceptiveness. Life has a way of clarifying what truly matters, doesn't it? Sometimes it takes a fall to help us see more clearly. "Indeed," Eleanor agreed. After Harold passed, I experienced something similar. Suddenly, all the social obligations and expectations that had seemed so important just weren't anymore. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching children play on the swings nearby, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "I understand you're quite the real estate maven these days," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Marianne Thornfield and I serve on the Arts Council together. She mentioned you're making some bold moves." I raised an eyebrow. "Client confidentiality seems rather flexible." Eleanor laughed softly. "Don't worry. She mentioned nothing specific, just that you're embarking on some exciting new chapter. We widows notice when one of our ranks breaks free of the expected patterns." Something about Eleanor's directness appealed to me. "I am making changes. Significant ones." "Good," she said firmly. "Too many of us get trapped in the role of family matriarch, expected to remain static while everyone else evolves around us. It's refreshing to see someone rewriting the script." By the end of our conversation, Eleanor had invited me to join her monthly luncheon group, 6 widows ranging in age from 65 to 82, who gathered to discuss everything from world politics to romance novels to investment strategies. "We call ourselves the Liberation Ladies," Eleanor explained with a mischievous smile. "Some liberated by choice, others by circumstance, but all determined to make these years count on our own terms." I accepted her invitation without hesitation, surprisingly eager for female companionship untethered to familial obligation. As I walked back to my apartment that afternoon, I realized I hadn't felt this buoyant in years, perhaps not since before Gerald's illness had begun its inexorable progression. The monthly luncheon with the Liberation Ladies proved to be transformative. Unlike family gatherings where I constantly felt evaluated and diminished, these women accepted me exactly as I was. They listened to my story with understanding rather than judgment, offered insights without attempting to control my decisions, and shared their own experiences of navigating family expectations with remarkable candor. Josephine, a former university dean with a wicked sense of humor, had redistributed her considerable assets to establish scholarships for single mothers returning to education after her adult son had mismanaged funds she'd provided for her grandchildren. Margot, once a celebrated concert pianist, had sold her historic home and moved into a modern apartment after her daughters attempted to pressure her into an assisted living facility they'd chosen without her input. Deborah, the eldest at 82, had scandalized her conservative family by embarking on a world cruise with a gentleman companion 20 years her junior. The way their faces froze when Edgar and I announced our travel plans, Deborah recounted. During my second luncheon with the group, her eyes twinkling. You'd think I'd proposed robbing a bank rather than enjoying the Mediterranean with a charming man who makes me laugh. Did they try to talk you out of it? I asked. Oh, they deployed every weapon in the arsenal, Deborah replied. Concern about my health, warnings about cruise ship norovirus, thinly veiled references to Edgar's possible financial motivations. My son even arranged for a casual lunch with their family attorney to discuss protecting my assets. The table erupted in knowing laughter. And what did you do? I inquired, genuinely curious. Deborah's smile turned decidedly wicked. I thanked them for their concern, then informed them I'd already updated my will to include a provision that anyone who attempts to interfere with my personal decisions on grounds of competency would be automatically disinherited. I found myself laughing more freely than I had in years. Did it work? Like magic, she confirmed. Suddenly, my judgment was deemed perfectly sound. Eleanor raised her glass in a toast. To creating consequences that clarify priorities. To consequences, we all echoed, clinking glasses. These women became my tribe, my sounding board, and eventually, my closest friends. Through them, I discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. Opinions I'd suppressed, interests I'd abandoned, desires I'd denied in service to others' needs and expectations. With the Liberation Ladies' encouragement, and Marianne, Thornfield's expert guidance, I embarked on the next phase of my transformation, finding a new home that would reflect my authentic self rather than my maternal identity. I don't want another apartment, I explained to the real estate agent Eleanor had recommended. I want a home with character, with history, with soul. Something that needs restoration, just as I'm restoring myself. Leanne Porter, the agent, was a dynamic woman in her 40s who specialized in historic properties. I think I understand exactly what you're looking for, she said after our initial consultation. We never saw anything like that in the will. The will covered the family home and personal possessions, I explained. Other assets were already jointly held or transferred before his passing. Alexandra's legal mind was visibly processing this information. How substantial are these investments exactly? Substantial enough, I replied vaguely. I've also decided to sell the lakefront property in Vermont. This revelation prompted actual gasps around the table. The Vermont property, a small, undeveloped parcel of land Gerald and I had purchased in our 30s, had been mentioned occasionally over the years as a potential site for a family vacation home someday. We had never built on it, but the property had appreciated significantly as the area developed into a popular vacation destination. You're selling the Vermont land? Rebecca asked, her disappointment evident. I thought that would stay in the family. It was never officially designated as a family inheritance, I pointed out. Gerald and I discussed selling it several times over the years. The market is favorable now. But we always talked about building something there eventually, Michael protested. A place where all the cousins could gather in the summers. Plans change, I said simply. The sale will provide additional security for my future needs. Jonathan, Alexandra's husband, cleared his throat. If it's not overstepping, may I ask what the property might be worth in today's market? The realtor estimates between $780,000 and $850,000, I replied, watching their expressions carefully. Alexandra's eyes widened. That's considerably more than I would have guessed. The area has developed significantly, I explained, and waterfront property is always at a premium. Michael leaned forward, his contractor instincts emerging. Before you commit to selling, I'd be happy to look at development options. We could potentially build a small home there within a reasonable budget, possibly even with an accessory apartment you could use. I understood immediately what he was suggesting, a property that would ultimately benefit the family while providing me with a temporary living space. The land would remain effectively in the family's control, eventually becoming theirs while creating the appearance of addressing my needs. That's thoughtful, Michael, but I've already signed the listing agreement. The property goes on the market next week. His face fell. Without discussing it with any of us? It's my property, I said gently but firmly. Gerald and I purchased it together. The decision is mine to make. An uncomfortable silence descended on the table. Rebecca fiddled with her napkin while Daniel stared into his wine glass. Jonathan whispered something to Alexandra, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. There's something else I want to discuss, I continued. My will and estate planning. This immediately recaptured everyone's attention. Alexandra, in particular, sat up straighter, her attorney's mind clearly engaged. I've been meeting with a new estate attorney, I announced. Given my current health challenges, it seemed prudent to update my arrangements. A new attorney? Alexandra questioned. Why not use Hampton and Reed? They handled all of Dad's affairs. I know several partners there personally. I preferred a fresh perspective, I replied. Someone who specializes specifically in elder law and estate planning for widows. Who did you select? Alexandra pressed. I hope you vetted them thoroughly. There are a lot of predatory firms targeting seniors. I suppressed a smile at her assumption that I couldn't possibly make such decisions without her guidance. Marianne Thornfield at Wayland Legal. She came highly recommended by my investment advisor. Alexandra's eyebrows rose slightly. Investment advisor? Mom, you've never mentioned having an investment advisor before. There are many things I haven't mentioned, I replied evenly. As you all begin to worry about my becoming a financial drain, I thought it might ease your concerns to know I've been actively managing my affairs. Michael had the grace to look embarrassed. Mom, about that conversation, I held up my hand. I'm not interested in apologies driven by the revelation that I have more financial resources than you suspected. That would only reinforce my disappointment. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Mom, that's not fair. We've all been trying to help with your recovery. Some more enthusiastically than others, I noted. But yes, you have provided assistance, and I'm grateful. What troubles me is the attitude behind that assistance, the sense that caring for your mother is an unreasonable burden rather than a natural extension of family love. That's not how we feel, Michael insisted, though his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Isn't it? I asked softly. Alexandra described me as a financial drain. After everything your father and I sacrificed to give you the opportunities you've had, that characterization was illuminating. Alexandra's professional composure cracked slightly. It was one comment in a stress-filled conversation. You're taking it out of context. Perhaps, I conceded. But it revealed something important about how you view familial obligation, and it's helped me make some difficult decisions. What decisions? Rebecca asked, her voice small. I've restructured my estate plan, I said. The details aren't important right now, but you should know that there have been significant changes from what Gerald and I originally intended. Jonathan leaned forward, his financial analyst background evident in his direct question. Are you saying you've changed your will to... Let me show you something special. The property she took me to visit the following day was nothing like I expected. Located in the historic district overlooking the harbor, it was a 3-story Victorian townhouse built in 1887. The exterior maintained its original architectural details, ornate cornices, a wraparound porch with delicate spindlework, and charming gingerbread trim, though the paint had faded and portions of the woodwork needed repair. It's been in the same family for generations, Leanne explained as she unlocked the front door. The last owner passed away 6 months ago at 97. Her heirs live abroad and have authorized me to find a buyer who will appreciate its historical significance. As we stepped into the grand entryway with its sweeping staircase and original stained glass window, I felt an immediate connection to the space. Despite the outdated wallpaper and worn carpeting, the house radiated a quiet dignity that resonated deeply with me. The electrical and plumbing were updated 20 years ago, Leanne continued, leading me through spacious, light-filled rooms with high ceilings and ornate moldings. The kitchen and bathrooms would benefit from modernization, but the structure itself is remarkably sound. The inspector noted the foundation is excellent, and the roof was replaced just 5 years ago. We toured all 3 floors, from the formal parlor and dining room on the main level to the 4 bedrooms on the second floor, and a charming third-floor space that had once served as a nursery and playroom. Every room told a story. Every worn floorboard and chipped tile hinting at lives lived fully within these walls. The backyard, though modest in size, featured mature oak trees providing dappled shade over a stone patio. A detached carriage house had been converted into a 2-car garage with an apartment above, perfect for housing a caregiver should I eventually need one. What do you think? Leanne asked as we completed our tour on the back patio. It's considerably larger than what I need, I observed, though I couldn't deny the house had captivated me. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but it offers flexibility. You could live primarily on the main floor if mobility becomes an issue. The carriage house apartment could accommodate a live-in aide, and in the meantime, you'd have space for visitors, hobbies, entertaining, room to expand into your new life rather than contract. I walked the property once more, envisioning what it could become with thoughtful restoration. The asking price was $1. $2 million. Well, within my means given the Vermont property sale and my actual financial resources, though dramatically more than my children believed I could afford. I'll take it, I decided, feeling a thrill of decisive independence. And I want to make a full-price offer with one condition: a 60-day closing to allow me time to arrange for the renovations to begin immediately after taking possession. Leanne beamed. The sellers will be delighted. They've declined several lower offers from developers who wanted to subdivide the property into condominiums. They'll appreciate knowing the house will be restored rather than reimagined. The offer was accepted the following day. I engaged a contractor specializing in historic renovations, an interior designer recommended by Eleanor who understood my desire for a home that honored the past while embracing modern comfort, and a landscape architect to revitalize the garden with sustainable, low-maintenance plantings. Throughout the planning process, I said nothing to my children about the purchase. Their assumptions about my limited means and their ongoing attempts to influence my financial decisions had created a barrier between us that I was not yet ready to dismantle. This transformation was mine alone, my chrysalis, my emergence, my flight. The weeks leading up to the closing passed in a flurry of activity. I selected paint colors, light fixtures, bathroom tiles, and kitchen appliances. I attended auctions and estate sales with Josephine, who had an exceptional eye for quality antiques that would complement the home's character. I consulted with an accessibility specialist to incorporate subtle features that would allow me to age in place gracefully. Wider doorways, a discreet elevator disguised as a linen closet, a curbless shower in the master bathroom. Through it all, I maintained cordial but measured relationships with my children. Alexandra continued to suggest lunches where she not so subtly probed for details about my investment advisor and estate plans. Michael repeatedly offered to inspect my apartment for safety hazards, though his eyes invariably wandered to bookshelves and closets as if inventorying potential valuables. Rebecca, the most genuinely concerned, brought home-cooked meals and grandchildren for visits, though even she occasionally made references to family heirlooms she'd always loved, or asked pointed questions about the Vermont property proceeds. I deflected these inquiries with gentle but firm boundaries, neither revealing my plans nor engaging in deception. When pressed directly, I simply stated that my financial matters were being professionally managed in accordance with my wishes. 3 days before the closing, Eleanor insisted on throwing a small housewarming party for me at her elegant condominium. "It's not technically a housewarming if I haven't moved in yet," I protested when she proposed the gathering. "Call it a new chapter celebration then," she countered. "Or simply humor an old woman who loves any excuse for champagne and canapes." The evening was intimate. Just the Liberation ladies, Marianne Thornfield, Leanne Porter, and the interior. Designer, Charlotte, who had become a friend during our many consultations. As we sipped champagne on Eleanor's terrace overlooking the harbor, Josephine proposed a toast. "To Olivia," she said, raising her glass, "who reminds us that self-respect has no expiration date, and to the magnificent transformation of both, a woman and a historic home," added Margot. "May both shine with renewed purpose." I felt a swell of emotion as I looked around at these women who had supported my journey without judgment or agenda. "Thank you all," I said. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined being here, feeling this. Sovereign. You've helped me rediscover parts of myself I thought were gone forever. "Nothing is ever truly gone," Eleanor said with quiet wisdom, "just waiting for the right conditions to flourish again." Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, Marianne pulled me aside. "I've been meaning to ask," she said softly, "have you decided how and when you'll tell your children about the house?" I sighed, having wrestled with this question for weeks. "I've decided to wait until after I've moved in and completed the essential renovations. I want them to see it as a fait accompli, rather than a decision open to their input or criticism." Marianne nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably wise. From what you've shared, they might attempt to interfere if given the opportunity, out of concern, they would say, but effectively undermining your autonomy." "Exactly," I agreed. "This is one area where I need to establish a clear precedent. My home, my choice, my life." The following week, I closed on the Victorian townhouse, the keys handed to me with a sense of ceremony by the seller's attorney, who shared touching stories about the previous owner's 7 decades in the home. "Beatrice would be pleased," he told me warmly. "She always said the house needed someone who would love it as she had. Not just its bones and beauty, but its spirit." Renovations began immediately, focusing first on structural necessities, replacing outdated electrical panels, installing a new water heater, reinforcing a section of the 3rd floor that had suffered minor water damage years earlier. The contractor established a command center in the dining room, with architectural plans spread across a massive table and material samples organized on shelves along one wall. I visited the house daily during this initial phase, watching with fascination as layers of old wallpaper were carefully removed to reveal original plaster, as floorboards were gently lifted to access wiring, as modern systems were integrated, with historical elements. Each decision required balancing preservation with practicality, honoring the past while preparing for the future. 3 weeks into the renovation process, Alexandra called to invite me to Sunday dinner at her home. "The whole family will be there," she said, her tone suspiciously cheerful. "Michael and Lisa, Rebecca and Daniel, all the grandchildren. It's been too long since we've all been together." The timing struck me as odd. Alexandra rarely hosted family gatherings without a specific occasion. "What's the celebration?" I asked. "Does there need to be a reason to gather family?" She countered, though something in her voice suggested there was indeed a purpose beyond simple togetherness. I agreed to attend, curious about the underlying motivation. The answer became apparent shortly after I arrived at Alexandra's home that Sunday. All 3 of my children and their spouses were present, along with most of the grandchildren, though the teenagers had been dispatched to the basement media room immediately after polite greetings. The adults gathered in Alexandra's formal living room for pre-dinner drinks, an atmosphere of forced casualness permeating the space. Michael and Daniel discussed golf scores with studied nonchalance, while Lisa and Rebecca arranged elaborate platters of appetizers that far exceeded the usual family dinner fare. Alexandra personally handed me a glass of mineral water with lemon, hovering solicitously. "How's the shoulder, Mom? You seem to be moving more comfortably." "Much improved," I replied. "Nearly back to normal function now." "That's wonderful," she enthused. "We've all been so worried. Actually, that's partly why we wanted everyone together today. We've been discussing some ideas we think you'll be excited about." And there it was, the real purpose behind the gathering. I took a small sip of water, waiting. "We know you value your independence," Alexandra continued, glancing at her siblings for support. "But we also worry about you living alone, especially after the fall." "I appreciate your concern," I said neutrally. "But as you can see, I've recovered well." Michael joined the conversation, setting down his scotch. "Mom, we've been researching some really excellent senior living communities. Not nursing homes," he added quickly, "but luxury independent living apartments with amenities and support services." "Willow Ridge Estates," Lisa chimed in. "It's like a 5-star resort, swimming pool, gourmet dining, classes and social events, and discreet medical support if ever needed." I noticed how carefully they were avoiding the word assisted in their descriptions, though that was clearly what they were proposing. "That sounds lovely," I said mildly, "for someone who wants that lifestyle." "We thought you might consider touring it with us next weekend," Rebecca suggested, her expression hopeful. "Just to see, no pressure. They have a 2-bedroom unit available on the ground floor overlooking the gardens," Alexandra added. "We could put a deposit down to buy. Hold it while you decide." I set my glass on a coaster, straightening in my chair. "I'm not interested in Willow Ridge Estates or any similar community at this time. But thank you for the research." Their expressions shifted almost simultaneously from hopeful to concerned. "Mom, we're just trying to help plan for your future," Michael said, his tone taking on that particular cadence adults use with children, or the elderly when they believe they know better. After the fall, it became clear that living alone in a regular apartment building isn't the safest option. "And the social aspect is important too," Rebecca added. "Studies show that isolation is a major health risk for seniors." I smiled, thinking of the Liberation Ladies, my regular library volunteering, and the book club I'd recently joined. "I assure you, my social calendar is quite full." Alexandra leaned forward, switching to her courtroom voice, precise, persuasive, with an undercurrent of authority. "Mom, we're concerned that you might not be making decisions with a clear understanding of the potential risks and limitations you'll face." The implication was unmistakable. They questioned my judgment, my competence to direct my own life. In that moment, I made a decision I hadn't planned on making quite yet. "Actually," I said calmly, "I've already made arrangements for my future living situation. I've purchased a new home." The room went utterly silent, expressions of confusion and disbelief spreading across their faces. "Purchased? A home?" Alexandra repeated slowly. "What kind of home?" "A Victorian townhouse in the historic Harbor District," I replied. maintaining an even tone despite the satisfaction I felt at their shock. The renovation is currently underway. I expect to move in within 6 to 8 weeks. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then all three of my children began talking at once. How could you possibly afford? The Harbor District is one of the most expensive. You made this decision without discussing. I held up my hand, silencing the chorus of protests. I purchased the home with funds from the Vermont property, sale, and my personal savings. The decision was mine to make, and I made it after careful consideration of my needs and preferences. But, Mom, Michael sputtered, those old houses are money pits. The maintenance alone has been factored into my budget, I interrupted smoothly, as have the necessary renovations to make it suitable for aging in place. Alexandra's legal mind was visibly processing this information, searching for an angle, a foothold. Is this why you've been meeting with that estate attorney? To finance this purchase? Mom, if you've taken out a mortgage at your age, the terms could be predatory. I paid cash, I stated simply. No mortgage, no financing. And my meetings with Marianne Thornfield concerned estate planning, not home purchasing. Lisa, never one to filter her thoughts, blurted out what the others were likely thinking. But how could you afford a house in the Harbor District? Those start at over $1 million. I met her gaze steadily. As I've mentioned before, Gerald made some sound investments that have performed well over the years. The Vermont property sale provided additional capital. My financial situation is more secure than you've assumed. But a house that size for just you? Rebecca questioned, genuine confusion in her voice. It seems so. Excessive. It's precisely what I want, I replied. Room to pursue my interests, entertain friends, and yes, accommodate family visits. When appropriate. The third floor has a charming space that would make a wonderful playroom for the grandchildren. As my children exchanged glances, I could almost see the rapid recalculations happening behind their eyes. Adjustments to their assumptions about my resources, reevaluations of their approaches to me, perhaps even recognition that they had fundamentally misjudged my capabilities. Well, Alexandra finally said, her professional composure reasserting itself, this is certainly unexpected. We'll have to see this house of yours once you're settled. I look forward to showing it to you, I replied with perfect sincerity. Now, shall we move to the dining room? I believe dinner must be ready by now. The remainder of the evening was a study in strained politeness, with conversation carefully steered toward neutral topics. The grandchildren's activities, an upcoming charity gala Alexandra and Jonathan were attending, Daniel's recent promotion. Beneath the surface, however, I could sense my children processing this seismic shift in their understanding of my situation, and by extension, their potential inheritances. As Michael helped me into my coat at the evening's end, he attempted to re-establish influence. Mom, before you get too far along with this renovation, I'd really like to look over the plans and contractor bids, just to make sure you're getting quality work at fair prices. Thank you, Michael, but I have complete confidence in the team I've assembled, I replied kindly but firmly. The architect specializes in historic preservation, and the contractor came highly recommended by the Historical Society. His expression flickered with frustration before smoothing into forced acceptance. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. As I rode home in the taxi, Alexandra had insisted on calling for me. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction at having finally asserted my autonomy, sadness at the transactional nature our relationships had assumed, and a quiet excitement about the future unfolding before me. For perhaps the first time since Gerald's death, I was living according to my own desires rather than others' expectations. The next morning, I called Eleanor to recount the previous evening's revelations. Oh, to have been a fly on that wall. She chuckled after I described my children's reactions. Did Alexandra actually drop her wine glass when you announced the house purchase? Nearly, I admitted with a laugh. She recovered quickly, but I've never seen her quite so speechless. And now? Eleanor asked. Do you think they'll adjust their approach to you? I sighed, considering the question seriously. I think they'll certainly recalibrate their assumptions about my financial situation. Whether that translates to genuine respect for my autonomy remains to be seen. Well, Eleanor said with characteristic directness, they're about to discover that the mother they've underestimated is now the queen of her own castle. That's bound to shift the dynamic. Queen of my own castle, I repeated, savoring the phrase. I rather like the sound of that. The revelation about my Victorian townhouse purchase caused a noticeable shift in my children's behavior. Suddenly, they were intensely interested in every aspect of my life, calling daily, dropping by my apartment unannounced, offering unsolicited advice on everything from contractors to furniture placement. What had been neglect transformed overnight into suffocating attention, though the underlying motivation remained transparent. Alexandra, predictably, took the most direct approach. She appeared at my apartment one morning, elegant in a tailored suit, bearing a box of pastries from an expensive bakery and a calculated smile. I thought we could have breakfast together before my first meeting, she announced, brushing past me into the kitchen where she began arranging croissants on a plate as if she were the hostess rather than the visitor. I can't stop thinking about this house of yours. I'd love to see the plans, maybe offer some input on the renovation. I accepted the coffee she poured, watching her carefully. The plans are finalized, Alexandra. Construction is well underway. She waved this away as if it were a minor detail. Plans can be adjusted. Jonathan's cousin is an architect, you know. He specializes in residential properties. I'm sure he'd be happy to review everything. Make sure you're getting the best possible outcome. I'm quite satisfied with my architect, thank you. Edward Lawrence has restored several historic properties in the district. His work is exemplary. Alexandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Edward Lawrence? His firm's charges premium rates. I hope you negotiated a reasonable fee structure. His rates reflect his expertise, I replied calmly. And yes, we agreed on a fair compensation arrangement. She took a delicate bite of croissant, studying me. Mom, I can't help wondering where all this is coming from. This sudden major purchase, extensive renovations, it's not like you to make such dramatic changes, especially without family consultation. Isn't it? I asked mildly. Or is it simply that you've never considered I might have desires and capabilities beyond what you've observed in my role as your mother? Alexandra set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. That's unfair. Of course I see you as a complete person. I'm just concerned that you might be making impulsive decisions at a vulnerable time. After Dad's death, the fall, the painful recovery, it would be understandable if you were seeking some kind of dramatic change to distract from grief. I nearly laughed at the amateur psychology. I appreciate your concern, but I assure you, my decisions are neither impulsive nor driven by emotional distress. They are the result of careful consideration about how I wish to live the remaining years of my life. And financially, are you absolutely certain this makes sense long term? Harbor District properties have high property taxes, maintenance, costs. Alexandra, I interrupted gently. My financial situation is secure. Gerald and I planned carefully for various contingencies. The house is within my means, both for purchase and ongoing maintenance. She leaned forward, her expression shifting to the one she likely used in settlement negotiations. Mom, let's be direct. How significant are these investments Dad apparently made? We're talking about, what, a few $100,000 in stocks or bonds. Even that wouldn't justify the expenditure you're describing. I met her gaze steadily. I've disclosed what's necessary, that I have sufficient resources for my needs and choices. The specific amounts aren't relevant to our discussion. They are if you're depleting capital that would otherwise constitute your estate, she countered, then immediately looked chagrined. as if she'd revealed more than intended. "Ah," I said softly. "So that's the concern. Not my well-being, but the potential impact on your inheritance." "That's not what I meant," Alexandra backpedaled quickly. "Of course your well-being comes first, but responsible financial management includes considering all stakeholders and long-term implications. I am managing my finances responsibly," I assured her, "and I'm quite clear about who the stakeholders are regarding my personal assets." Alexandra left shortly afterward, frustrated by my refusal to provide specific details about my financial situation. She wasn't the only one seeking information, however. Michael took a different approach, arriving at my apartment the following weekend with a toolbox and forced cheerfulness. "Thought I'd check that loose cabinet door in the kitchen you mentioned last month," he announced, though I had made no such complaint. "While I'm here, maybe we could swing by the new house? I'd love to see how the renovation is coming along." His transparent strategy might have been amusing had it not been so calculating. Nevertheless, I saw no reason to refuse the visit. Perhaps seeing the actual property would help my children adjust to my decision. "That would be fine," I agreed, "but there's no need to fix anything here. The cabinet doors are all functioning properly." Michael looked momentarily disconcerted, but recovered quickly. "Well, prevention is better than repair. Let me just take a quick look around, then we can head over to the new place." I watched with silent amusement as he performed a show of inspecting various aspects of my apartment, conveniently opening closets and cabinets that might contain financial documents or valuables. Finding nothing of interest, he eventually declared the apartment in good shape and escorted me to his SUV for the drive to the Harbor District. As we approached the Victorian townhouse, I felt a surge of pride and anticipation. Even with scaffolding along one side and a construction dumpster in the driveway, the house exuded character and dignity. Much like myself, I thought with a small smile. A bit weathered, but standing strong. Michael let out a low whistle as he parked across the street. "This is bigger than I expected. How many square feet?" "Just under 4,000 for the main house," I replied, "plus the carriage house apartment, which adds another 800. His eyebrows shot up. "Mom, that's substantial. For one person, I mean, it suits my needs," I said simply, leading the way to the front entrance where I entered the code on the temporary lockbox. Inside, the transformation was already visible despite being far from complete. The entrance hall had been stripped of dingy wallpaper, its ornate moldings restored to their original splendor. Gaps in the flooring showed where electrical work was being updated, and tarps covered areas still awaiting attention. But the essential character of the home, its soaring ceilings, generous proportions, and abundance of natural light, was unmistakable. Michael walked through the spaces slowly, his contractor's eye assessing every detail. I could see him mentally calculating costs, comparing finishes, evaluating workmanship. The master suite on the main floor, with its newly installed bathroom featuring a zero-entry shower and discreet grab bars disguised as towel racks, drew particular scrutiny. "This is high-end work," he finally commented as we toured the kitchen where custom cabinetry was being installed. "Looks like you're sparing no expense." "I'm investing in quality and longevity," I corrected. "Every decision balances historical authenticity with modern convenience and accessibility." "And you're managing this renovation yourself?" His tone suggested doubt. "I have an excellent project manager, recommended by my architect. She coordinates with all the contractors and provides me with weekly progress reports and any decisions that need my input." Michael frowned slightly. "You know, Henderson Construction could have handled this entire project at a much better rate. My crews have experience with older homes." "I'm sure they do," I acknowledged, "but I preferred to work with specialists in historical restoration. The craftsmanship required for these details is quite specific." As we continued through the house, His expression grew increasingly troubled. In the formal dining room, now serving as project headquarters, he stopped to examine the architectural plans spread across a large table. "This level of renovation must be costing a fortune," he said bluntly. "The millwork alone. These are custom reproductions of original details, aren't they?" "Where possible, we're restoring original elements," I explained. "When that's not feasible, yes, we're having appropriate replacements crafted." Michael turned to face me directly. "Mom, I have to ask, how are you really funding this? Even with the Vermont property sale, the numbers don't add up based on what I know about your and Dad's finances." I maintained my calm demeanor. "As I've explained to Alexandra, Gerald made investments that performed well over the years. Our financial situation was more robust than you children were aware of." "How robust?" he pressed. "Are we talking low seven figures? More?" "We're talking about sufficient resources for me to live comfortably and make the choices that suit my needs," I replied evenly. "Beyond that, the specific amounts aren't relevant to our conversation." Frustration flickered across his face. "Mom, I'm in construction. I can estimate what this renovation is costing. Combined with the purchase price of this property, we're talking serious money. If Dad left that kind of wealth, don't you think his children deserve to know? Your father and I always agreed that our financial matters were private. That hasn't changed with his passing." "But it affects us," Michael insisted. "If there are substantial assets, there are tax implications, estate planning considerations, all of which are being professionally managed," I assured him. "Marianne Thornfield is handling my estate planning with great care." The drive back to my apartment was tense, Michael clearly frustrated by my refusal to provide specific financial details. As he pulled up to the entrance, he made one last attempt. "Mom, I hope you know you can trust us. Whatever Dad left, however much it is, we just want to make sure it's protected. For your security and for the family's future." I patted his hand gently. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Michael. And I'm doing what your father and I always intended." Rebecca's approach was more subtle, but no less determined. She invited me to lunch at her home the following week, carefully arranging for her 12-year-old twins to be present, knowing my fondness for them. As the girls chattered about school and activities, Rebecca maintained light conversation, waiting until they were occupied with dessert before leaning closer. "The girls miss seeing you," she said softly. "We all do. I've been thinking, once you move into the new house, maybe we could establish a regular family dinner tradition. Sunday evenings, perhaps? It would give the cousins time together and ensure we stay connected." The suggestion was delivered with seemingly genuine warmth, and of all my children, Rebecca had always been the most emotionally attuned. Still, I couldn't help noticing how this newfound desire for regular family gatherings coincided with the revelation of my unexpected financial resources. "That's a lovely idea," I replied, "though perhaps not every Sunday. I'm developing quite an active social calendar these days." Rebecca looked surprised. "Oh, what kind of activities?" "I've joined a book club that meets twice monthly. There's my regular volunteer work at the library, and I've become quite involved with a group of vibrant women who call themselves the Liberation Ladies. We meet for luncheons, cultural outings, even the occasional weekend trip." "That sounds active," Rebecca commented, her expression a mixture of surprise and something like disappointment. "I had no idea you had so many commitments." "There's a lot about my life you haven't inquired about," I observed mildly. Rebecca had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I guess we all got used to you being available whenever we needed you." "Yes," I agreed. That was the established pattern, wasn't it? But patterns can change. She fidgeted with her napkin. "Mom, about the house. Alexandra mentioned you've hired some high-end professionals for the renovation." I have excellent people working on the project, yes. And you're comfortable? With the expense. I mean, it must be significant. I smiled patiently. As I've told both Alexandra and Michael, I have sufficient resources for my needs and choices. The renovation fits within my budget. Rebecca leaned closer, lowering her voice, though the twins were engrossed in their own conversation at the other end of the table. Mom, is there more that Dad left? More than what was in the will? Your father and I built a secure financial foundation over the decades of our marriage, I replied. The specific details aren't important for you to know, except that I'm well provided for. She looked unsatisfied with this answer, but seemed to realize I wouldn't be more forthcoming. After a moment, she changed tactics. The thing is, Mom, Daniel and I have been discussing the twins' college funds. With education costs rising so dramatically, we're concerned about having enough saved by the time they're ready for university, especially if they follow the family tradition of pursuing advanced degrees. There it was. The real purpose behind the lunch invitation and family dinner proposal. Higher education is certainly expensive these days, I acknowledged. You and Daniel are wise to plan ahead. Rebecca hesitated, then pressed on. We were wondering if there might be any possibility of assistance. Not now, necessarily, but perhaps a commitment we could count on when the time comes. If Dad did leave substantial investments, maybe a portion could be designated for the girls' education. I studied my daughter's face, so like Gerald's with her warm brown eyes and gently rounded cheeks. Of my 3 children, Rebecca had always been the most openly affectionate, the one who seemed to value family bonds for their emotional rather than practical worth. Yet here she was, just like her siblings, attempting to secure access to resources she suspected might exist. Rebecca, I said gently, your father and I helped put you through university and graduate school. We supported Michael through 2 business ventures before his construction company succeeded. Alexandra received substantial assistance with law school and her first home purchase. We considered that direct support an important investment in your futures, and we never regretted it. And we're incredibly grateful, Rebecca said quickly. Truly. I'm glad to hear that, I continued. But your father and I always believed that providing for the next generation's education and opportunities was primarily the responsibility of their parents, you and your siblings, not their grandparents. We gave you the foundation to build successful lives and careers specifically so you could provide for your own children. Rebecca's face fell slightly. Of course I understand. It's just that with costs so high now and the competition for good schools. You and Daniel are both successful professionals, I reminded her. You have resources and time to build college funds. The twins are only 12. There are still years to prepare. The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but I could sense Rebecca's disappointment lingering beneath her cheerful facade. As I prepared to leave, she made one final attempt. Mom, if you ever feel the house is too much to manage alone, you know you always have a place with us. The girls would love having you here. The offer was made with apparent sincerity, but I noted how it came only after I'd declined financial assistance for the twins' education. A consolation strategy, perhaps, maintaining access to potential future support. That's very kind, I replied, embracing her. But I'm quite looking forward to creating my own space, on my own terms. The following weeks brought escalating attempts by my children to gain insight into my financial situation and influence my decisions. Alexandra invited me to lunch with her estate planning colleague who just happened to be available to discuss hypothetical scenarios involving substantial assets. Michael arranged for his construction company's interior designer to drop by with catalogs of furnishings that would be perfect for a historic home, offering employee discounts if I placed orders through him. Rebecca began sending listings for expensive private schools, casually mentioning scholarship opportunities, but emphasizing how the twins deserve the very best education, just like you always wanted for us, Mom. Throughout these transparent maneuvers, I maintained pleasant but firm boundaries, neither providing the financial details they sought, nor engaging in their attempts to establish claims on resources they increasingly suspected existed. I continued to focus on my renovation project, my friendships with the Liberation Ladies, and my evolving vision for this new chapter of my life. Then came the catalyst that transformed simmering tension into open conflict. 6 weeks into the renovation, I received an unexpected visit from Marianne Thornfield at my apartment. Her expression was grave as she settled on my sofa, declining the tea I offered. "Olivia, I need to make you aware of a concerning development," she began. "Alexandra contacted our firm yesterday, requesting a meeting with our managing partner, Harold Whitman." I raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "She presented herself as your daughter and attorney, expressing serious concerns about your recent financial decisions and possible undue influence from new advisors who might be taking advantage of your vulnerability following your injury." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "She has no standing as my attorney." "Harold made that clear," Marianne assured me. "He explained that I represent you exclusively and that any concerns should be directed through proper channels, with your permission." Alexandra was persistent. She suggested that your recent behavior indicates possible cognitive impairment affecting your financial judgment. "She what?" My voice emerged sharper than intended. "She didn't use those exact words," Marianne clarified. But the implication was clear. She mentioned the sudden purchase of an expensive property, extravagant renovation decisions, and your uncharacteristic secrecy about financial matters as evidence of possible diminished capacity. "That's absurd," I said, anger building despite my efforts to remain calm. "I'm perfectly competent." "Of course you are," Marianne agreed. Harold shut down the conversation immediately. He reminded Alexandra that questioning a client's competence without medical evidence borders on defamation, and suggesting attorney-client relationships where none exist raises ethical concerns. How did she respond? "Not well. She mentioned that as your daughter and a fellow attorney, she has special insight into your normal decision-making patterns. She implied that failing to investigate her concerns could constitute negligence on our firm's part." I closed my eyes briefly, containing my anger. She's fishing for information about my finances by suggesting I'm incompetent to manage them. "That would be my assessment," Marianne confirmed. Harold diplomatically suggested that if she has genuine concerns about your cognitive capacity, the appropriate step would be to consult with medical professionals, not attempt to circumvent attorney-client privilege. And did she indicate any intention to pursue that avenue? Marianne's expression grew more serious. "She didn't commit either way, which is why I wanted to alert you immediately. In my experience, when adult children begin questioning an elder parent's competence, particularly when substantial assets might be involved, the situation can escalate quickly." I nodded, processing this betrayal. "Thank you for letting me know. What would you recommend as precautionary measures?" "First, I suggest a comprehensive cognitive assessment with a geriatric specialist, not for your benefit, but to establish a formal record of your mental acuity. Second, we should prepare power of attorney documents naming someone you trust implicitly, someone not financially interested in your estate. Finally, we might consider videotaping our next major legal discussion to document your clear understanding of the decisions you're making." "All sensible precautions," I agreed. "I'll arrange for the assessment immediately. As for power of attorney, I'd like to discuss options." By the time Marianne left an hour later, we had developed a comprehensive strategy to protect my autonomy from my children's potential interference. The plan was prudent and professional, yet beneath my composed exterior, I felt a profound sadness. That Alexandra would attempt such an underhanded approach essentially trying to declare me incompetent to gain access to financial information, cut deeper than I had imagined possible. I had barely processed this news when my phone rang. It was Eleanor, her voice uncharacteristically tense. "Olivia, are you busy? I think you need to know something." "What is it?" I asked, already bracing for more unwelcome news. "I was at my hair salon this afternoon. You know Claudette's downtown?" Alexandra was there as well, in the chair beside mine. She was on her phone most of the time, but I overheard a concerning conversation with someone named Jonathan, your son-in-law, correct? "Yes, that's right. She was discussing you, quite explicitly. Something about exploring options for guardianship if you continue to make irrational financial decisions and refuse appropriate family oversight. She mentioned consulting with an elder law specialist about the possibility of having you declared." Eleanor paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Having me declared incompetent," I finished flatly. "Yes, she said something about documenting erratic behavior and concerning patterns following your fall and recovery. Olivia, it sounded like a coordinated strategy, not a casual conversation." My hand tightened around the phone. "Thank you for telling me, Eleanor. It seems my daughter is moving faster than I anticipated." "What will you do?" she asked. "Whatever is necessary to protect my autonomy," I replied with quiet determination, starting with a call to my children. After ending the call with Eleanor, I took several deep breaths, centering myself before what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. Then I sent a text message to all 3 of my children. "Family meeting at my apartment. 7 p.m. tonight. Essential that all of you attend. No spouses or children, please." Alexandra responded first. "I have dinner plans with clients. Can we reschedule for tomorrow?" "This is not optional," I texted back. "Cancel your plans." Michael Yao replied next. "Is everything all right? Health issue?" "We'll discuss when you arrive," I responded. Rebecca simply wrote, "I'll be there." I spent the next few hours preparing, both emotionally and strategically. I called Dr. Emmett Chen, a renowned geriatric specialist recommended by Marianne, and was fortunate to secure an appointment for a comprehensive cognitive assessment the following morning due to a cancellation. I reviewed the latest financial reports from my investment advisor, confirming the exact status of all accounts. Finally, I contacted my project manager at the Victorian townhouse, instructing her to accelerate certain aspects of the renovation, specifically to prioritize making the master suite and kitchen fully functional within 3 weeks. By the time my children arrived that evening, I was calm, focused, and absolutely resolute. Alexandra entered first, still in her work attire, her expression professionally neutral. Michael followed, concern evident in his furrowed brow. Rebecca came last, her eyes darting nervously between her siblings and me. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing toward the living room seating. "I've called you here because we need to address a situation that has developed." "Mom, are you okay?" Rebecca asked, settling on the edge of the sofa. "You seem upset." "I am upset," I confirmed. "I've received 2 disturbing pieces of information today. First, Alexandra attempted to circumvent my attorney-client relationship by contacting Marianne Thornfield's firm, suggesting I might be mentally incompetent to make financial decisions. Alexandra straightened, her chin lifting defensively. "That's an overstatement. I expressed reasonable concern about sudden, uncharacteristic financial behaviors following a traumatic injury, which any responsible daughter would do." "Is that why you were discussing guardianship options with Jonathan this afternoon?" I asked quietly. Her eyes widened fractionally, the only indication of surprise from a seasoned litigator. "I don't know what you're referring to." "You were overheard at Claudette's salon, Alexandra, discussing strategies to have me declared incompetent if I continued to refuse appropriate family oversight of my finances." Michael turned to stare at his sister. "You're trying to get guardianship of Mom without talking to us?" Alexandra's composure slipped momentarily. I was exploring all potential options to protect Mom's interests. After her fall, she suddenly starts making major financial decisions, buying expensive property, refusing to discuss specifics. These are legitimate red flags. Red flags for what exactly? I asked, my voice steady. For a woman reclaiming her independence. For a widow deciding how to use the resources she and her husband accumulated over decades of careful planning? Or are they red flags because they interfere with expectations about what would eventually become your inheritance? That's not fair, Rebecca protested. We're concerned about you, not about inheritance. Are you? I challenged gently. Then why has every conversation since you learned about the house purchase circled back to questions about my finances? Why the sudden interest in college funds for the twins, Michael's offers to oversee the renovation, Alexandra's attempts to involve herself in my estate planning? An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Let me be absolutely clear, I continued. I am mentally sound. I am making deliberate, informed decisions about my own resources, and I will not tolerate any attempts to undermine my autonomy through insinuations about my competence. Alexandra shifted to a conciliatory tone. Mom, we're not questioning your basic competence, but major life changes, Dad's death, your injury, living alone. These can affect anyone's judgment. We're trying to provide support and oversight to prevent potential mistakes. Oversight, I repeated. An interesting choice of words, suggesting authority you do not have. I am not answerable to you regarding my financial decisions. But we're family, Michael interjected. Doesn't that mean anything? It means everything, I replied. Which is why your apparent willingness to pathologize my independence is so deeply disappointing. I reached for a folder on the coffee table and removed several documents. Tomorrow morning, I'm undergoing a comprehensive cognitive assessment with Dr. Emmett Chen, one of the leading geriatric specialists in the country. I've also scheduled appointments with 2 other independent specialists for second and third opinions. These evaluations will establish formal documentation of my mental acuity. Alexandra's expression tightened as she recognized the preemptive legal strategy. Additionally, I continued, I've executed a durable power of attorney naming Eleanor Whitford as my agent should I ever become genuinely incapacitated. Eleanor has no financial interest in my estate and will act solely according to my established wishes. Who is Eleanor Whitford? Michael demanded. Some random friend with no understanding of family considerations? Eleanor is a retired judge with extensive experience in estate matters, I replied calmly. She's also become a dear friend who respects my autonomy. I returned the documents to the folder, then met each of my children's eyes in turn. Now, here's what's going to happen. There will be no further attempts to question my competence or interfere with my financial decisions. There will be no discussions of guardianship, no consultations with elder law specialists about my case, no further contact with my attorneys without my explicit permission. And if these boundaries aren't acceptable to us, Alexandra challenged, lawyer to the core, then the consequences will be significant, I said, my voice gentle but absolutely firm. My estate plans can be amended at any time. Currently, despite recent disappointments, I've maintained provisions for each of you and your children. That could change if forced to defend my basic dignity and autonomy against those who should be most committed to protecting it. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable in its implications. You disinherit your own children? Rebecca whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I would protect myself from those who would use legal mechanisms to strip me of my independence, I corrected. I would hope such measures never become necessary. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Mom, this feels like an overreaction. None of us has actually filed for guardianship or taken legal action. Not yet, I acknowledged. and now you understand why you never will." I stood, signaling that the conversation was concluded. "I love each of you deeply. That hasn't changed. But the dynamic between us must change. I am not merely a mother or grandmother or widow. I am a woman with her own identity, resources, and right to self-determination. I need you to see me, truly see me, as I am now, not as the role I've played in your lives." My children departed shortly afterward, subdued and seemingly chastened by the encounter. Whether they truly understood the fundamental issue at stake, respect for my personhood beyond my maternal identity, remained uncertain. What was clear, however, was that they now recognized there would be consequences for attempting to circumvent my autonomy. The following morning, I completed the cognitive assessment with Dr. Chen, performing exceedingly well on all measures of memory, reasoning, judgment, and executive function. His formal report, delivered 3 days later, stated unequivocally that I demonstrated superior cognitive functioning across all domains, with no indication of impairment affecting decision-making capacity. I forwarded copies to Marianne Thornfield for my legal file, and to my children as a professional rebuttal to any lingering doubts about my competence. Alexandra sent a terse email acknowledging receipt. Michael called, awkwardly attempting to explain that he'd never questioned my basic smarts. Rebecca arrived at my apartment with a bouquet of lilies and tearful apologies for any misunderstanding. None of them mentioned guardianship, competency, or financial oversight again. In the week that followed, I accelerated my plans for the next phase of my life. The Victorian townhouse renovation progressed rapidly, with the master suite, kitchen, and main floor living areas nearing completion. I began selecting furnishings, commissioning custom pieces where appropriate, and planning the garden restoration with a landscape architect who specialized in Victorian-era designs. Throughout this period, my children maintained a cautious distance, seemingly uncertain how to navigate our relationship under the new paradigm I had established. Their communications became more respectful, less presumptive, though I sensed they were still processing the revelation that their mother possessed resources, both financial and personal, they had never fully acknowledged. The confrontation had been painful but necessary, clearing away pretense and establishing clear boundaries. Whether those boundaries would foster healthier relationships or merely enforce a wary detente remained to be seen. What was certain, however, was that I had reclaimed authority over my own life, and in doing so, had perhaps offered my children their most important lesson yet about respect, dignity, and the courage to stand firm in one's own truth. On a crisp, autumn morning, precisely 4 months after purchasing the Victorian townhouse, I stood in the center of the restored front parlor, watching as morning light filtered through the newly refurbished stained glass transom, casting jewel-toned patterns across the polished hardwood floor. The renovation had been completed 3 weeks earlier, transforming what had been a neglected historic property into a home that honored its architectural heritage while embracing modern comfort and accessibility. Every choice, from the historically accurate paint colors to the discreetly installed elevator, reflected my vision for a space that would support independence and joy in my later years. Today marked the official housewarming celebration, an afternoon gathering for which Eleanor and the Liberation ladies had insisted on handling all arrangements. "You've managed enough projects lately," Josephine had declared when I attempted to discuss catering options. "Let us take care of this one." As I wandered through the rooms, making final adjustments to flower arrangements and smoothing already perfect cushions, I marveled at how completely this house already felt like home. The formal dining room, with its restored coffered ceiling and crystal chandelier, now housed not only an elegant mahogany table that could seat 12, but also Gerald's cherished book collection in built-in shelves along one wall. The kitchen blended Victorian charm with state-of-the-art appliances, its generous island providing a perfect gathering spot for casual conversations. Throughout the house, I'd incorporated treasured possessions from my life with Gerald alongside, carefully chosen new pieces that reflected my current tastes and needs. The third floor, once a nursery and children's playroom, had been transformed into a bright studio space where I'd begun exploring painting and other artistic pursuits I'd eye. Set aside decades ago, the carriage house apartment stood ready for future caregiving arrangements, though for now it served as comfortable guest quarters for visiting friends. Everything had been designed with thoughtful intention, not just for my current abilities, but for potential future limitations. Doorways were wider than standard, thresholds flush, lighting abundant. The garden featured raised beds at various heights, allowing for gardening from a standing position or seated if necessary. Every decision reflected my determination to create a home where I could age with dignity on my own terms. As I adjusted a pillow on the window seat overlooking the harbor, the doorbell chimed. Eleanor arrived first, elegant as always in a teal dress that complemented her silver hair, bearing a bottle of champagne and an orchid in a copper pot. "It's absolutely perfect, Olivia," she declared after I'd given her a tour of the completed spaces. "Exactly the right balance of grandeur and comfort. You've created something truly special here." "I'm rather pleased with how it turned out," I admitted, accepting the compliments without the self-deprecation I might have defaulted to in the past. Another small but significant change, learning to acknowledge my accomplishments without diminishment. The Liberation ladies arrived in quick succession, each exclaiming over different aspects of the restoration. Josephine admired the kitchen's cleverly concealed modern conveniences. Margot gravitated immediately to the baby grand piano I'd installed in the front parlor, running her fingers lovingly over the keys. Deborah declared the master bathroom positively decadent, with its deep, soaking tub and heated floors. Marianne Thornfield arrived bearing a vintage map of the harbor district from the 1880s, professionally framed. "For your new study," she explained. Leanne Porter, the real estate agent who had helped me find the property, brought a bottle of wine and stories about other historic homes in the neighborhood. Even Dr. Chen made an appearance, charming everyone with his gentle humor and genuine interest in the home's accessibility features. By mid-afternoon, the house buzzed with conversation and laughter as caterers circulated with champagne and elegant hors d'oeuvres. Watching my diverse circle of friends interacting, professional connections, new acquaintances, long-standing companions, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This gathering represented not just a celebration of my new home, but an affirmation of the life I was consciously creating. The doorbell chimed again, and I turned to see my children standing in the entryway, each holding housewarming gifts, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and caution. I had invited them, of course, though their attendance had remained uncertain, until this moment. "Welcome," I said warmly, embracing each in turn. "I'm so glad you could come." "We wouldn't miss it," Rebecca replied, though the slight tremor in her voice suggested the decision hadn't been simple. "The house is stunning, Mom, truly." I gave them a brief tour, noting their expressions as they took in the scope and quality of the renovation. Alexandra studied the architectural details with grudging appreciation. Michael assessed the craftsmanship with professional interest, occasionally nodding in approval. Rebecca seemed genuinely delighted, particularly by the third-floor studio, with its spectacular views of the harbor. "I had no idea you were interested in painting," she commented, examining the easel positioned to capture the northern light. "There are many things about me you've never asked about," I replied gently. "But it's never too late to learn." The afternoon progressed, my different worlds converging with surprising harmony. I observed Alexandra engaged in animated conversation, with Marianne about landmark preservation laws. Michael discovered shared interests with my contractor, the two of them discussing the challenges of sourcing authentic period materials. Rebecca joined Margot at the piano, turning pages as the former concert pianist played a Chopin nocturne that filled the house with elegant melancholy. As sunset approached, Eleanor gathered everyone in the front parlor for a toast. Raising her champagne flute, she addressed the assembled guests with the dignified presence that had made her a formidable judge. "To Olivia," she began, "who has demonstrated that our later years can be not merely an epilogue, but perhaps the most authentic chapter of our lives. This beautiful home represents far more than a restoration of historic architecture. It stands as a testament to reclaiming one's true self after decades of putting others first." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I noticed Alexandra shift uncomfortably, Michael study his shoes, Rebecca blink rapidly. "In my years on the bench," Eleanor continued, "I observed countless family disputes where the central issue was not money or property but recognition, the deep human need to be seen and respected as an autonomous individual, not merely a role or resource. Olivia has navigated that difficult territory with remarkable grace, establishing boundaries without severing connections, claiming her independence without rejecting her past." She raised her glass higher. "To new beginnings built on hard-earned wisdom. To Olivia, and to the liberation that comes when we finally listen to our own truth." "To Olivia," the guests echoed, glasses raised. As conversations resumed and guests began to depart, Alexandra approached me in a quiet moment. Her professional composure slightly softened. "Mom, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice lower than usual. "A real one, not the perfunctory acknowledgement I sent after everything. I was wrong to approach Marianne's firm the way I did, wrong to discuss guardianship options without talking to you directly. I studied my daughter's face, so like mine in structure, though her expressions had always been more guarded, more calculated. Thank you for saying that, Alexandra. I appreciate your candor." She hesitated, then continued. "I've been doing some reflection since our confrontation. I realized I've spent my entire adult life viewing relationships through a transactional lens, measuring inputs against outcomes, assessing potential risks and benefits. It served me well professionally, but perhaps less so personally." "That's an insightful observation," I said carefully, unwilling to rush this rare moment of vulnerability. "When you announced the house purchase, when it became clear there were financial resources we hadn't known about, my legal training immediately activated. I began thinking about asset protection, estate implications, professional concerns rather than personal ones." She met my eyes directly. "I wasn't seeing you, Mom. I was seeing a client with potentially mismanaged assets." "And now?" I asked. A faint smile touched her lips. "Now I'm seeing a woman who clearly knows exactly what she's doing. This house, these friends, the life you're creating, it's impressive and humbling." "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a great deal coming from you. I can't promise I'll never slip back into attorney mode," she admitted, "but I'm working on seeing the people in my life as people first, not problems to solve or assets to manage." Later, as the party wound down, I found myself in the kitchen, with Michael, who was helping the caterers pack remaining food into containers. His assistance surprised me. Thoughtfulness had never been his defining characteristic. "You know," he said, sealing a container of canapes, "I came today expecting to find flaws in the renovation. Shortcuts, compromises, the kind of issues I always discover when homeowners manage projects themselves." "And?" I prompted. "And I couldn't find any," he admitted, shaking his head with reluctant admiration. "Your team did exceptional work, better than some of my own recent projects, if I'm being honest." "They were true artisans," I agreed. "I valued their expertise and gave them the resources and autonomy to do their best work." Michael was quiet for a moment, organizing containers with uncharacteristic meticulousness. "That's not how I've been running my business lately," he finally said. "I've been focusing on volume, profit margins, expansion, pushing crews to work faster, cutting corners where clients wouldn't notice." That doesn't sound like the quality-focused builder you once aspired to be, I observed. It's not, he acknowledged. Somewhere along the way, I started chasing bigger contracts, more impressive client lists, a certain lifestyle, and lost sight of the craftsmanship that made me love construction in the first place. I placed a hand on his arm. It's never too late to recalibrate. Maybe, he said, though doubt lingered in his expression. Lisa wants us to look at vacation. Properties in the Bahamas. The kids need college funds. The lifestyle we've built has significant overhead. All choices, I reminded him gently. Just as Gerald and I made choices throughout our marriage, sometimes prioritizing experiences over possessions, relationships over status, security over luxury. Choices Dad made too, apparently, Michael said, his tone hovering between curiosity and lingering resentment. All those investments you mentioned. Your father believed in building slowly, steadily, quiet growth that compounded over decades without fanfare or flash. It wasn't exciting, but it was effective. Michael nodded slowly. I could stand to incorporate some of that philosophy. Maybe focus the business on fewer, higher-quality projects rather than constant expansion. As the last guests departed, I found Rebecca in the third-floor studio, gazing out at the harbor lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. She turned as I entered, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. This room, she said softly. It feels so much like you, Mom. I didn't even know you wanted to paint. There are many dreams I set aside during my years of active parenthood, I told her. Not with resentment, but with the understanding that seasons of life bring different priorities. Now I'm in a new season. Rebecca brushed at her eyes. I think I've been stuck in one season, believing it would last forever. The kids' activities, Daniel's career demands, my sales targets, running so fast I never questioned whether the direction made sense. She gestured toward the easel, the carefully arranged art supplies. You've created space for contemplation, for exploration. I can't remember the last time I did that. It's never too late to begin, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken. To Michael. The twins asked about taking art classes this summer, Rebecca said thoughtfully. I dismissed it as impractical, not aligned with their academic needs, not optimizing their college applications. But seeing this space, hearing how you're rediscovering old passions, maybe I've been too focused on their achievement rather than their joy. Balance is difficult, I acknowledged. Gerald and I wanted you children to have opportunities we didn't, advantages that would set you up for success. But perhaps in emphasizing advancement, we inadvertently modeled always looking forward to the next achievement, rather than finding fulfillment in the present. Rebecca's smile was watery, but genuine. I'd say you're making up for that now. This house, this life you're creating, it's all about present joy, isn't it? Present joy informed by past wisdom and future considerations, I corrected gently. Not abandoning responsibility, but ensuring it's properly balanced with personal fulfillment. After my children departed, Alexandra with a reserved hug, Michael with awkward but sincere compliments on the house, Rebecca with tearful promises to visit again soon. I stood on the front porch watching their cars disappear down the tree-lined street. Eleanor joined me, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. Successful summit? She inquired, knowing how significant this first post-confrontation gathering had been. Promising, I replied. Not transformed, but perhaps beginning to shift. Families are perpetual works in progress, Eleanor observed. The question is whether the renovation efforts go both ways. I smiled at her apt metaphor. Time will tell. For now, I'm content with having established clear boundaries and receiving some acknowledgement of my autonomy. We stood in companionable silence, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue sky. You've done something remarkable here, Olivia, Eleanor said finally. Not just with this beautiful house, but with your life's third act. You've refused to accept diminishment. I had excellent examples, I replied, thinking of her and the other liberation ladies. And a profound wake-up call. Later that night, after the last friend had departed and the caterers had removed all traces of the celebration, I moved through my new home in solitary appreciation. Every room held promise. Future gatherings, quiet mornings with coffee and a book, creative afternoons in the studio, peaceful evenings watching the harbor lights. This house represented not just a dwelling but a declaration. I deserved space, beauty, comfort, and dignity in my later years. In my bedroom, a serene retreat with views of both the harbor and the garden, I opened the carved box where I kept Gerald's most personal effects. Among them was the letter he had written during his final weeks, to be read after his passing, when I felt ready. I had read it once immediately after the funeral, then set it aside, too raw with grief to fully absorb his words. Tonight, surrounded by evidence of my new beginning, seemed the right moment to revisit his final thoughts. His familiar handwriting, slightly wavering but still distinctly his, filled the cream-colored stationery. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, I've begun the journey we all must take alone, leaving you to continue yours without my physical presence. I hope you feel me beside you nonetheless, cheering your every step forward. We've spent 45 extraordinary years building a life together, raising our children, supporting each other's dreams, weathering life's inevitable storms. Through it all, you've been my anchor, my joy, my home. As you face this next chapter without me by your side, I have one fervent wish, that you will now live fully for yourself. You've given so much to me, to our children, to everyone who has had the good fortune to know you. You've put others first with such constancy that I fear you may have forgotten how to prioritize your own happiness. The financial provisions we've made together ensure you need never worry about security. The trust fund will eventually benefit our grandchildren, as we discussed, but only after you've lived your remaining years exactly as you wish, traveling if that brings you joy, creating a new home that reflects your personal taste rather than family compromises, pursuing interests you've shelved while caring for everyone else. My greatest fear is not death itself, but the possibility that you might diminish your own life out of some misplaced sense of obligation to preserve what we built for the family. Our children are established now, with resources and opportunities beyond what most people ever know. What they need from you isn't more sacrifice, but the example of a woman who embraces her later years with courage, dignity, and joy. Remember, our conversation on that bench in Riverside Park, just after my diagnosis. You asked what I would do if roles were reversed, if you were the one departing first. I said I would honor your memory by living well, by finding new purpose and perhaps even new love. I meant it then, and I mean it now as I write these words. Give yourself permission, my darling. Permission to say no to obligations that drain rather than fulfill you. Permission to explore paths we never had time to wander together. Permission to reinvent yourself in whatever ways bring you genuine satisfaction. Know that I will love you always and everywhere, not as a static memory, but as an evolving, growing spirit. The greatest gift you can give me now is to become the fullest version of yourself. The Olivia who exists beyond wife, beyond mother, beyond the roles that have defined but never limited who you truly are. With eternal love and boundless gratitude for our shared journey. Gerald. I traced his signature with my fingertip, tears flowing freely but without the sharp pain that had accompanied my earlier grieving. In its place was a profound sense of connection and confirmation. Gerald had anticipated what I would need to hear, had given me not just financial security, but emotional permission to reshape my life after his departure. The trust fund that my children had never known about, the central element in my recent conflict with them, had been established with clear intention. It wasn't simply an inheritance to be passed from one generation to the next, but a tool for ensuring my independence and dignity in widowhood, with the secondary purpose of eventually benefiting our grandchildren. In redirecting those resources to establish the Richardson Larson Charitable Foundation, I hadn't betrayed Gerald's wishes, but honored his most fundamental desire: that I live authentically and fully in my remaining years. The foundation would still serve those in need, elderly individuals facing their final years without family support or financial resources, while allowing me to maintain appropriate boundaries with children who had demonstrated they viewed me primarily through the lens of potential inheritance. I carefully refolded the letter and returned it to its place in the carved box. Then I moved to the window overlooking the harbor, watching the moonlight cast a silver path across the dark water. The same moon had witnessed every phase of my journey: young bride, devoted mother, supportive wife, grieving widow, and now finally, a woman coming into her fullest selfhood. The confrontation with my children had been painful but necessary, clearing away pretense and establishing clear expectations. Their participation in today's housewarming suggested potential for healing, for establishing new relationships based on mutual respect rather than duty or financial interest. Whether that potential would be realized remained to be seen, but I had created the conditions for possibility. More importantly, I had reclaimed authority over my own narrative. The trust fund my children never knew about, the inheritance they had counted on without acknowledging, had been repurposed for greater good. Not out of vengeance or retaliation, but from the recognition that legacy encompasses more than material assets. True inheritance is found in values lived, wisdom shared, and the courage to stand firm in one's own truth. As I prepared for sleep, in my new home, surrounded by beauty I had chosen and comfort I had earned, I felt Gerald's presence not as a ghost, but as a continuing partnership transcending physical separation. He had given me the foundation for this third act. I had built upon it something entirely my own. Tomorrow would bring new experiences: a meeting with the Richardson Larson Foundation Board to review the first round of grant applications, lunch with Josephine to discuss a weekend art retreat she'd discovered, perhaps even beginning the seascape I'd been envisioning for the space above the living room fireplace. The future stretched before me not as a diminishing path, but as an expanding horizon, rich with possibilities I was finally free to explore. Whatever challenges might arise, health concerns, family tensions, the inevitable limitations of aging, I would face them with the hard-won knowledge that I was more than capable of standing my ground and charting my own course. After my children said I was a burden, I canceled the trust fund they never knew about. But what I discovered in that painful process was something far more valuable than money: the freedom to finally live as my most authentic self. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.